This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Europe, live from CGTN in London. I'm Robin Dwyer.
And I'm Juliet Mann. Our top stories. The US trade representative resists pressure from business to drop tariffs on Chinese imports, but offers some targeted exclusions.
Petrol patrol. The British Army steps in to help deliver fuel as the country's supply crisis continues.
The Spanish government pledges $240 million for reconstruction on La Palma, where the volcano continues to wreak havoc.
And are you wearing green makeup? We talk to L'Oreal about sustainability because the planet's worth it.
The US will hold frank conversations with China soon as Washington acts to defend its economic interests to the hilt. That was the pledge from US Trade Representative, who has been laying out the Biden administration's highly anticipated strategy relating to US-China trade.
Catherine Tai said Washington has been assessing how far China has met the promises made in Phase 1 of the trade deal agreed with the previous Trump administration in January. That brought an end to a tit-for-tat trade war involving billions of dollars worth of goods.
In the coming days, I intend to have frank conversations with my counterpart in China. That will include discussion over China's performance under the Phase 1 agreement, and we will also directly engage with China on its industrial policies. Our objective is not to inflame trade tensions with China. Durable coexistence requires accountability and respect for the enormous consequences of our actions.
Well, let's get more on that dual coexistence with CGTN's John Terrett, who's in New York. John, good to see you. What else did Catherine Tai have to say?
Hey, Robin and Juliet. Well, let me try and wrap this up as quickly as I can for you. You have to understand that there's been radio silence from Washington pretty much on the issue of the Biden administration's policy towards trade with Beijing. And now that has been broken pretty seriously for the very first time. We have the background to this of President Xi and President Biden speaking in September last month, in which they agreed to keep open all lines of communication. So now we have some of the first details of what is actually being thought about trade with China in the White House at this time. And that's because the Trade Representative Catherine Tai, who's the 19th person to hold this particular position, has started setting out her stall, as it were, and she was doing it at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, part of the well-known think tank Row, right in the heart of downtown Washington, D.C. The headline for me, Phase 1 continues. There was talk that they might kind of phase out the Phase 1 of the Trump trade agreement altogether. Well, they're maintaining it. Also on the table, more tariffs if they feel that they are necessary. Now, Catherine Tai accused Beijing of failing to meet all its promises regarding that Phase 1 trade deal from 2020. They have research that suggests Beijing's only done about 62% of what it promised it would do under that Trump deal. And as you heard in the bite before I came on, she's talking about expecting frank conversations with her opposite number in Beijing, and that would include Phase 1 performance by Beijing and also industrial policies. And she set out 4 areas where she said that the sort of state situation in China of propping up businesses is damaging democracies around the world. And they are the following. Steel. She said China produces in 1 month more steel than the rest of the world can in 1 year. Solar, she said 80% of it is out of China now. There's no real supply chain in the United States anymore, though there was supposed to be. Agriculture, she said, is badly affected, and semiconductors as well. And what she's talking about here is Beijing essentially propping up these companies, whether they are at home in China or indeed overseas. She said, as you heard in that bite, this is not meant to be inflammatory. Durable coexistence requires a bilateral process. She did say that meaningful reform has so far been elusive. What she means by that is that over the years, various people in the Beijing government have suggested, yes, we will reform, we will be much more open and all that kind of stuff. And she's saying that nothing has really happened. Now, What she's calling for is a new holistic approach involving US allies, including those in Europe. And all of this comes at a time, of course, when Chinese companies are still delisted here at the New York Stock Exchange. Americans can no longer invest in many Chinese corporations, this under the Biden administration as well as Trump as well. And the Competition Act is working its way through the Congress. Presently, it is in the House. This is all happening because China here in America right now is seen as being far more aggressive, both economically and in other areas as well. And I cite examples like the South China Sea, Hong Kong and Xinjiang, all of which you're very familiar with. In other words, there is no real desire within the Biden administration to move away from the Trump-era tariffs that have been in place and to go back to what we had before Trump came along, which was truly international open trade between the two capitals. And that is because I think the Biden administration sees these tariffs in place, although they hurt both sides, the tariffs in place as they are at the moment give them a lot of leverage over Beijing that they would not have otherwise. There was supposed to be talk that they were going to be offering exclusions for some US companies. I did not hear that in the speech. I listened to all of it. So my summation of the whole thing is that really not a great deal has changed between the Biden administration and the Trump administration when it comes to trade issues in China. Robin and Juliet?
Well, thank you, John Terrett. So phase one continues, perhaps a more holistic approach, but nothing much has changed. John Terrett in New York, thank you. Well, Beijing has long been urging Washington to lift its tariffs, saying no one's benefiting from the trade war.
Economic and trade cooperation between China and the United States serves the fundamental interests of the two countries and two peoples and benefits the whole world. China always maintains that imposing tariffs does no good to China, the US or the economic recovery of the world. At a time of increasing inflationary pressure around the world, tariffs will cause great pressure and losses to businesses and consumers.
Well, let's talk some more about this now with Anna Ashton in Washington, D.C. She's Director of Business Advisory Services at the US-China Business Council. Thanks so much indeed for talking to us today, Anna. So this isn't really what businesses had been hoping for, is it?
It's really not. Unfortunately, I think we've been waiting for 9 months now for the Biden administration to complete this China policy review and trade policy review. And this rollout, I think we're going to hear more from other members of the administration. This is just one little slice of the rollout of this policy review, but it seems a lot like what we've had to date, which is a Biden administration that has every intention of sticking largely to the tools and the remedies that the Trump administration left in place. We didn't hear a lot about a new approach at all. We heard that we're going to continue to use tariffs as a major tool in addressing our trade issues with China. We heard a defense that wasn't a detailed defense of tariffs as an effective tool, but I didn't hear anything about how they've been effective and no addressing the ways that they have been bad for U.S. economic interests. We heard that phase one is going to be a focus in enforcing the terms of the phase one deal. And we heard that there will be dialogue to talk about other aspects of the trade relationship, but no when, no who, no where. So it was a bit disappointing, yes.
There was a mention, though, of tariff exceptions for some businesses. What more do we know about those?
So there were no details on what the exclusion process is going to look like, when it's going to be restarted. But that is a bit of good news that there will be a restart of the exclusion process that largely lapsed over the course of late last year and early this year. And this is something that businesses have been very frustrated with, because even if the administration needed to carefully review all of our China policies and trade policies that we had in place before deciding how to move forward with 301 tariffs or other measures, it seemed like a no-brainer that they ought to maintain an active tariff exclusion process so that companies could at least apply for exemptions from certain tariffs if they met the criteria, but that didn't happen. And companies have been carrying the burden of the tariffs this entire time without any recourse. And so, yes, it's good that recourse is going to resume in some targeted way, which makes it sound more limited than what existed in the past, but it can't come soon enough.
Looking ahead then, Catherine Tai mentioned recoupling. How do you see the United States and China trade relationship evolving from here?
Recoupling was such an interesting term. It's unclear what that means. To what extent has the Biden administration assessed that we have decoupled? There are certainly areas where tension is very high and trade is sliding, but I wouldn't say that we've decoupled yet. We've been worrying about the extent to which we might decouple. Recoupling sounds positive in the sense that it's a recognition that there are pragmatic realities here for both of our economies that mean that we need to be able to continue doing business with each other. But it also sort of sounds ominous because it suggests that there's going to be decoupling first.
Anna Ashton from the US-China Business Council. Great to get your thoughts today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pressure is growing on the British government to let in more foreign workers amid ongoing supply problems. Thousands of short-term visas will be issued for truck drivers and poultry workers.
But Prime Minister Boris Johnson says immigration isn't the answer. CGTN's Guy Henderson reports.
Operation Escalin is underway. Hundreds of British military personnel deployed to help distribute fuel and ease shortages at filling stations. Things have improved across much of the UK. In the southeast, including London, less so. A labour shortage is partly to blame for this crisis, which increasingly extends well beyond just petrol. As the Conservative Party conference got underway on Sunday, Prime Minister Boris Johnson remained reluctant to see immigration as the answer post-Brexit. So instead, the message on Monday is this will pass.
That's really a function of the world economy, particularly the UK economy, coming back to life after COVID, sucking in gas in particular. There's massive demand for that in Asia. There's a shortage of lorry drivers actually around the world, from Poland to the United States. Even in China, they're short of lorry drivers. And what we want to see is a high-wage, high-skill economy where we invest in people, invest in fantastic infrastructure like this behind me, and drive high productivity growth.
That very model would be threatened, the British government believes, by letting in more foreign workers. And yet the list of industries calling for exactly that are growing, including from these pig farmers waiting for the Prime Minister outside the conference venue.
We're here to ask the government to give us some short-term COVID recovery visas of 12 to 18 months, which will allow that bottleneck to be unleashed and for us to not end up having to kill pigs on farm, which would be an absolute travesty.
Supermarkets are beginning to warn of product shortages in the build-up to Christmas now. Turkeys are the latest on the panic buying list. It comes amid reports ministers were warned about a supply chain crunch months ago. Now it's here. And so far, no one's quite sure how long it might last. Guy Henderson, CGTN, London.
Europe's energy crisis and what to do next is being debated by finance ministers in Luxembourg. The meeting comes after energy prices in the EU reached record highs last week. There are fears that the rising cost could hinder the post-pandemic recovery and have a big impact on inflation. Well, Giles Gibson's covering this story for us. Good to see you, Giles. So, on the agenda today, I suppose it's all they've been talking about, soaring gas, energy prices. Were they the key talking points?
Yeah, that's right. And these rising energy prices, of course, are coming at the worst possible time because as we head into those colder winter months, that's exactly when people use more energy, use more gas to actually heat their homes. Last week, we saw Dutch gas futures breaking this symbolic barrier of €100 per megawatt hour. We also understand that gas storage levels across Europe are just much lower this year than they have been in previous years. And as Pascal Donoghue, the Irish finance minister, who's also chairing this meeting in Luxembourg, acknowledged as he went into this meeting, 2020 and the winter of 2020 was also a really tough time for Europe.
We've come through a terrible economic test with COVID. The performance of our banking sector during that time is something that we have closely monitored. And while we have many challenges and many opportunities ahead that we have to pursue, the general tone of our October meeting will be the progress that we have made, monitoring where we are with inflation and looking at how we can continue to work together closely for the rest of this year and into next year for the benefit of the people of Europe.
And of course, rising energy prices are also a big driver of inflation going up as well. And just in September, we actually saw inflation for the Eurozone hitting a 13-year high.
Giles, I mean, this could really potentially create tension, couldn't it, between some of the member states?
Yeah, because the thing is that energy prices and gas prices really overlap with a lot of really complex, really complicated long-term issues between member states in the European Union. You know, questions about whether, for example, Europe is just too reliant on Russia for its natural gas supplies, whether decarbonisation and the EU's new big climate push could potentially actually push up energy prices in the medium term. Meanwhile, in the short term, we are already seeing countries across Europe taking action to try to protect consumers from these rising energy prices. We saw the French government, the French Prime Minister announcing that they're going to be freezing electricity and natural gas prices. And we've also seen Spain saying that they're going to cut energy taxes last month. So the big question really is, coming out of this meeting, are we going to see any sort of coordinated action at the European level as well?
Oh, that might be asking too much, Charles. Giles Gibson in Brussels, thank you very much.
Still to come on CGTN. Shooting stars, why Russia is sending a film crew into space.
Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to the Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now.
Covering the world from 4 continents. A new horizon. Teams in Beijing, Washington, D.C., Nairobi, and London. Who connect, interact, and inquire to bring you the stories that matter to all. The Link, only on CGTN. Facing the unknown is always difficult. In a world in turmoil, it's easy to lose orientation. But when the storms come, we have to see the possibilities. Reinvent. Find new opportunities. Discover a path forward. CGTN. See the difference.
The world has changed under the pressure of the pandemic. For many of us, life is returning to some kind of normal. As we're adapting to changes in all of our lives, let Global Business Europe be your guide to the new normal. Join us weekdays on CGTN.
Welcome back. And remember, CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV. We're on YouTube and Dailymotion at cgtn.com and the CGTN app. And here in the UK, we're available 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Hungary's Prime Minister has criticised the EU's policies towards Russia and China, accusing officials in Brussels of being blindsided by ideology. Viktor Orban says the bloc is working against its own interests and called for increased cooperation with Moscow and Beijing. Well, our correspondent Penelope Liersch joins us now from Budapest. So, Penny, what else has Viktor Orban said?
Well, Viktor Orban really, as you said, attacking this ideology from the elitists in Brussels. This is a similar rhetoric we've heard from Viktor Orban and some of his counterparts around Central and Eastern Europe for quite some time, not overly keen on the way the bloc is dealing with a number of different issues like trade, migration, LGBT rights. These right-wing nationalistic rulers whose conservative governments want to try and keep things a little more sovereign towards their countries, not always keen with the way Brussels has been handling things. And similarly on this issue, it's not surprising to see Viktor Orban coming out calling for Brussels to be taking this opportunity to have more cooperation and more trade partnerships with these huge trade players, China and Russia, saying, if anything, that there is too close an eye on Washington, that really Brussels shouldn't be dancing with the US, but rather putting their eyes onto these other big trade markets as well. Viktor Orban saying he does believe that Brussels and the US see that as China as its biggest trade competitor, but they should not be being cut out by Brussels, that Brussels needs to have a more autonomous trade policy, a sovereign trade policy to look after its own interests with these big markets, and also its own militaries to deal with different things that are affecting the EU so that it can continue to run as best it can with trade and other issues. Robin?
So, Penny, give us some context on Hungary's relationship with China and Russia.
Well, early on in this pandemic, or around the time vaccines were being released, Viktor Orban's government reached out to China and Russia both to supply vaccines at the beginning of this year. They took China's Sinopharm vaccine and the Sputnik vaccine from Russia before they were given any approvals by the European Medicines Agency or any listings from the WHO emergency listing base. So the first country within the EU to particularly be using that China's Sinopharm vaccine. Millions of Hungarians have had that vaccine and the Sputnik vaccine as well, which have caused some issues when people have then tried to travel around Europe and other areas that do not necessarily accept the validity of those vaccines. We have also seen a really big gas deal being signed in the last week by Hungary, committing to 15 years with gas giant Gazprom from Russia to supply the country's gas supply. And interestingly, that bypasses the Ukraine, where the gas has been being pumped through for the past few years. So it has caused some diplomatic tensions there. We have also seen a huge amount of financial investment in Hungary from China, from Chinese companies and also the Chinese state, particularly around infrastructure in rail and freight trade, trying to bring in a large amount of different materials, equipment, things that need to be assembled in Europe into different countries and then Hungary and then on to different parts of the EU. So a very big trade partner. China and Russia both probably at their strongest diplomatic relations with Hungary at the moment. So not surprising to see these comments from Viktor Orban wanting more countries in the EU to take part.
Penelope Liersch in Budapest, thank you.
Italians are voting in a second day of regional elections, seen as a performance indicator for the country's political parties. Mayors and councillors are being chosen in more than 1,000 municipalities, including cities like Rome and Turin, where the Five Star Movement is hoping to consolidate gains it made 5 years ago. Results are expected to take some time after the polls close later on Monday.
An Italian court has suspended extradition proceedings against the former head of Spain's Catalonia region, meaning he can leave Italy. Carles Puigdemont was arrested while visiting Sardinia. He's wanted by Spain for running what Madrid says was an illegal independence vote in 2017. The judge in Sardinia said the extradition would now depend on rulings in other European courts, one of which relates to Puigdemont's immunity as an MEP.
Japan's new Prime Minister has called an election just hours after being formally sworn in to the top job. Fumio Kishida says a general election will be held on the 31st of October as he seeks a fresh mandate to deal with the coronavirus pandemic, sagging economy and regional threats. The 64-year-old has replaced Yoshihide Suga, who resigned after only 1 year in office. Analysts say he's hoping to capitalise on the honeymoon period typically enjoyed by new administrations.
The DPRK has reopened its lines of communication with the South months after it cut its cross-border hotline. The move comes after the country's leader, Kim Jong-un, indicated he would be willing to restore communication. However, Pyongyang has said that the relationship between the nations is dependent on the attitude of the South Korean authorities.
Swedish artist Lars Vilks, whose drawings of the Prophet Muhammad with the body of a dog caused worldwide controversy, has died in a car crash. Vilks has been living under police protection since the pictures were published in 2007 and was travelling in a police vehicle when it collided with a truck. 2 officers were also killed. The 75-year-old received death threats over the cartoon, survived 2 attempts on his life, and Al-Qaeda put a $100,000 bounty on his head.
Research into our reaction to chili and wasabi has earned 2 American scientists this year's Nobel Prize for Medicine. The prize is for their discovery of receptors for temperature and touch, which could lead to the creation of new painkiller medications. The Nobel Committee praised the work of Professors David Julius and Ardem Pataputian, saying their groundbreaking research could be used to develop treatments for a wide range of disease conditions, including chronic pain.
Spain's Prime Minister has promised a new package of emergency aid for the island of La Palma in the Canaries. Over the weekend, Pedro Sanchez toured the island, which has now suffered more than 2 weeks of volcanic eruptions and lava flows.
Over 6,000 people have been evacuated from their homes and more than 900 buildings destroyed. Rahul Pathak has more.
Now into its 3rd week, the Cumbre Vieja volcano has increased in intensity. The eruptions have caused the partial collapse of the north side of its cone. Huge rocks and debris were sent hurtling down the mountain as the molten lava explosions lit up the night sky. The debris has now covered an area similar in size to 25 football pitches and wreaked havoc on the local community. The Spanish Prime Minister, Pedro Sanchez, returned to the island on Sunday and was briefed on the latest developments. He announced a new aid package to help rebuild the essential infrastructure, which has been agreed in addition to the $12 million pledged by his government last week.
This Tuesday, the Cabinet will approve a package of very powerful measures to help with infrastructure, reconstruction, water supply, employment, agriculture and tourism. We will also provide tax benefits where needed. The total amount will be around $239 million.
So far, over 6,000 people have been evacuated from their homes and more than 900 buildings have been destroyed. Emergency services have lifted a stay-at-home order in place over the weekend for areas that have been affected by poor air quality. The Spanish Volcanology Institute, Involcan, reported several medium-range earthquakes on Sunday and early Monday, but experts believe that there is no immediate threat to any of the other islands in the Canaries.
They should not be worried about it. In the whole history of the Canary Islands, no simultaneous eruptions on the other islands have ever been recorded. This eruption is localized. It is in the south end of the island, the western sector, so it is very controlled in one area. No seismic activity, changes in landform, or any other signs have been detected on the other islands.
Now, the Cumbre Vieja is far more aggressive than its predecessor 50 years ago. This volcano has released around 80 million cubic tons of molten lava. That's twice as much in around half the time of the previous blast in 1971. So it looks like the residents will have to be patient for some time yet before this current eruption slows down. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
Still to come here on CGTN, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and US Climate Envoy John Kerry are in France for talks. Can they repair some of the damage done by the AUKUS submarine deal?
The EU's digital COVID certificate, which offers the promise of unlocking hassle-free travel around Europe this summer.
In less than 2 weeks' time, the Czech border will also open to all EU and Serbian citizens.
4.4 million Hungarians received their first dose of COVID vaccine.
18 and over can receive a COVID-19 vaccination, but it does come with conditions.
Third wave will probably take longer to emerge. This vaccination centre is part of a massive effort to try and drive down the numbers of the new variant that was first identified in India.
On the agenda with me, Stephen Cole, we look up into space.
We look down into data. We look at debt. We look at politics. We look at opioids, climate change. We look at all the issues that really matter around the world. But you matter too. We want to tell the stories you want to see and hear about. Make it your agenda.
Roger, reading you loud and clear.
We can try out the wild and crazy ideas.
Nothing can stop an idea whose time is coming. This idea is coming.
I actually feel quite comfortable in isolation.
We should all be very basic when we're trying to save the world.
Awesome!
We hope it will happen. We have to live in hope.
The agreement is signed. But what is the real deal now the UK has left the EU? For trade, for business, for the city, for ordinary people. Make sense of Brexit with CGTN.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Juliet Mann and me, Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. The US Trade Representative resists pressure from business to drop tariffs on Chinese imports, but offers some targeted exclusions.
The Spanish government pledges $240 million for reconstruction on La Palma, where the volcano continues to wreak havoc.
Petrol Patrol. The British Army steps in to help deliver fuel as the country's supply crisis continues.
The UK's Finance Minister, Rishi Sunak, has spoken at the Conservative Party conference. Mr Sunak spoke about the financial struggle the country faced and warned that the UK must make difficult choices to improve its financial sustainability.
And there can be no prosperous future unless it is built on the foundation of strong public finances. I have to be blunt with you. Our recovery comes with a cost. Our national debt is almost 100% of GDP, so we need to fix our public finances.
Earlier, I spoke to Richard Burge, CEO of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, about the Chancellor's speech. I asked him how slow the recovery from COVID and Brexit might be.
Yes, I think we're into long COVID and long Brexit. I wish the Chancellor, if he'd known it was going to be like this, had told everyone in advance and we could have prepared ourselves for it. But it seems to have come, frankly, as a surprise both to government and to all of us that we've got fuel and supply chain shortages, we have inflation rising, and we have massive staff shortages across all industries, especially in hospitality and in agriculture.
You mentioned the supply chain shortages in the UK, some of those being put down to Brexit. But the Chancellor also said that Brexit is in the long-term interests of the country. So what's the business community's view?
Well, I think business communities are worried much more about surviving the short term at the moment. It's all very well, the Chancellor suggesting that we have long-term bright sunlit uplands. We have to find a path to getting there. And at the moment, most businesses just don't think as though they've got to feel as though they've got a pathway to those bright sunlit uplands of a Brexit Britain. What they want to know is how do they get their goods now, which are currently not being shipped to the UK? How do they actually get fuel into their vehicles, which apparently is not a problem on mainland Europe? And how do they ensure themselves against rising costs and inflation and the potential for interest rises as well?
There was also a promise not to allow more immigration to stop those shortages. But is the model of a high-wage and higher-skill economy realistic?
We'll have to see. I mean, a higher wage economy means higher costs of goods, higher costs of services. It means inflation. It is as simple as that. But also, it's not necessarily so that higher wages will bring in more people. And many of the jobs we have for with vacancies in are pretty well paid. So where are they going to come from? They're going to come from people shifting from one job to another because it's better paid. We've already seen this. with the HGV sector, where people have moved out of HGVs into higher paying careers in something else because the money's turned up. I mean, inflating wages doesn't necessarily create more skilled workers.
What would business like to see now? What would make the most difference?
Well, I think government's got to pull the levers it can. I think retaining as much business support in place, I mean, removing some of the tax incentives on, for instance, VAT for eating in and other things should be left in place. Maybe furlough should be extended for some of those businesses in the very high pressure areas. But it also does mean opening up our borders significantly more than we've got at the moment. We're not asking for open borders and a free-for-all. The Prime Minister seems to think that it's either open borders or very, very tiny immigration allowances. No, there is a middle ground, which is supply and demand. And at the moment, there is demand and there is no supply.
And listening to the speech from Rishi Sunak today, he talked a lot about the future, perhaps positioning himself as a future leader of his party or potentially Prime Minister. Would business welcome a change now?
No, I think business just wants government policy to be consistent and effective and pragmatic and have foresight. Frankly, who delivers that is not important.
US Secretary of State Antony Blinken and US Special Presidential Envoy for Climate John Kerry are in France for talks this week. Discussions will cover a range of issues from climate change to international cooperation, but are likely to be overshadowed by the fallout from the recently signed AUKUS deal, which torpedoed a French contract for nuclear submarines. Ross Collins in Paris for us. Ross, after that upset over the AUKUS pact, is this trip as much about mending fences as anything else?
Yeah, that was the worst diplomatic crisis we've ever seen between France and the United States, sparked by Australia signing a new submarine deal with the United Kingdom and the United States reneging on that contract it signed with France in 2016, really upsetting France to the extent that it recalled its ambassadors for France and to France from Australia and from the United States. The ambassador in Washington is back in place, the start of an attempt to mend these fences, as you say, and the visit by Antony Blinken to France to meet his French counterpart Jean-Yves Le Drian also go some way to try to ease the tensions. But as a sign of how in the forefront of European thinking the AUKUS diplomatic crisis remains. So look at the agenda for the EU summit tomorrow and on Wednesday in Slovenia. They're going to be talking about the Balkans, possible accession to the Union of Montenegro and North Macedonia in the future. They're going to be talking about the pandemic. They're also going to be talking about the AUKUS diplomatic crisis, French diplomats ensuring that that issue does appear on the agenda for EU leaders. So it's still at the forefront of consciousness and still at the forefront of thinking. And so Antony Blinken and Jean-Yves Le Drian are set to be discussing that further here in France.
Ross, it just sounds like there's a crammed agenda and lots to talk about. What do you think is going to make the headlines?
Lots to talk about when it comes to the green recovery. Of course, we now turn our attention in the election cycle towards France. German elections as well. There'll be discussions there on the Jamaica or the traffic light, whichever coalition is going to take government in Berlin. We're looking forward to the French elections next year as well. The French presidency of the EU coming to the fore in the 1st of January. The G20 summit later this month is going to be discussed as well. And also the COP events. COP15 in Kunming in China next week. COP26 in the United Kingdom next month. And all of that is related to the final chance for major climate talks before COP15 taking place today in France with the One Planet Sovereign Wealth Fund Summit. That was set up by Emmanuel Macron 4 years ago. He was hosting it again today. John Kerry, the US Special Envoy for the Climate, he made an appearance at the summit, really looking for more influence from the big institutional investors in the world, making sure that the private sector is also living up to its climate green ambitions, trying to get the private sector to match those ambitions that governments lay out, such as trying to reduce carbon emissions, trying to hit carbon neutrality. So today we had the One Planet Summit on private sector funding and private sector initiatives on the climate. Tomorrow there's going to be meetings at the OECD, headquartered here in Paris. Antony Blinken is going to be attending those. Also talks this week between Jean-Yves Le Drian and Antony Blinken, likely about the AUKUS diplomatic crisis as I said, and also tomorrow and Wednesday, that EU Leaders Summit where we can expect all these issues to reappear again.
Ross Cullen in Paris, you're going to have a very busy week. Thanks very much for joining us.
Shares in Chinese property giant Evergrande have been suspended on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange as the company prepared to make an announcement on a major transaction. The company later revealed it was expecting a potential buyout offer for its property management group. The crisis has triggered fears that its potential collapse could send shockwaves through global markets.
Oil prices have jumped to a 3-year high after OPEC and its allies said they're sticking to an existing pact for a gradual increase in oil output. The oil producer group faced calls to increase its output to bring down soaring prices and protect the global economic recovery, but they decided against boosting production further. Brent crude rose 3% to trade around $81.48 a barrel.
4 large pharmacy chains will go on trial in the US state of Ohio, charged with flooding their communities with opioid pills. 2 counties are bringing the legal action against the companies, which all deny wrongdoing. It's the first of thousands of opioid-related cases filed in the state and comes after 3 large pharmaceutical distributors and the drug maker Johnson & Johnson proposed a $26 billion settlement for cases against them.
The International Air Transport Association has told members meeting in Boston that the deepest point of the coronavirus crisis is now over, with demand picking up for global travel. The industry body predicts next year's losses will narrow to $11.6 billion, down from a loss of almost $52 billion this year. But it's urged governments to keep support measures in place until international traffic recovers fully.
French beauty company L'Oreal has unveiled its sustainability push at Expo 2020 in Dubai. The cosmetics giant says its focus for the future is on green sciences, as well as female empowerment and diversity.
It's already committed to only using renewable plant sources and abundant minerals in its products by 2030 and says helping to empower women is crucial. When I spoke to Blanca Duty, L'Oreal Chief Corporate Affairs Officer, and also who's driving sustainability in cosmetics? Is it the consumer or the company?
In many ways. Some of it, of course, lies with us, making sure that the ingredients in your products are as much as possible from biodegradable and biosources, which is one of our main tasks with green sciences, so that we will be able to create products that are natural but are not competing with the planet. And are also safe for human consumption. Then we can always produce products such as solid shampoos, which have no plastic, or products as any shampoo that rinses easily so that you use a lot less water. So some of it will, of course, lie with us and what we put into the products. The packaging, as you said, is very important, and we're moving a lot of our brands and a lot of our packaging to refillable concepts, and, of course, to using less plastic. So just, making sure that your plastic is recyclable, that it weighs less, so you use less of it, and that you move to new types of plastics. We are just, for instance, piloting with a technology, with a startup called Carbios. We are piloting recycled plastic using enzyme technology, and we're also using packaging made out of cardboard.
What about what goes down the drain? So you might have used your shampoo bar or maybe something refillable, or you've rinsed it off. How can you guarantee to your consumers that what ends up in the ocean is not going to be damaging?
Well, precisely. So that's why the green sciences revolution is so very important. The more of green products that you produce, the better it will be. And that's the big revolution we are making. Now, many people think that, a plant-based by definition is good, but then you could be competing with food sources. So the green revolution is about, using microorganisms and nature and then making it scalable in the lab so that you're not competing with food sources and you're not affecting biodiversity. So we are really looking in all of our production, our intention is to create products that are ever better for the planet and for human consumption as well.
Blanca, I have to ask you about lipstick sales, because that's a sometime barometer of the health of the global economy, isn't it? But with all the pandemic mask wearing, our pouts were concealed. So how are sales doing now?
Yes. Well, obviously, with the pandemic, people did use less lipstick. However, for instance, eye makeup and mascaras were doing very well. And of course, we've learned a lot and we've done a lot of makeup, like in this country of the world where I'm now in the Middle East, which, you know, in this part of the world, non-transferable makeup is a non-negotiable. And now with everybody wearing masks, you know, it was important to take that everywhere. If you looked at our first half results, which we announced recently, you will see that we are back at our cruising speed. And in fact, wiping most of the economic impact of the pandemic. The industry grew 11%. We outgrew that. We almost grew double at 20%. And compared to 2019, it was over 6% up. So obviously, we are back to growing, back to the cruising speed of before the pandemic. And what you saw during the pandemic is that while people were maybe not using as much lipstick, they were very much looking after their skin and their hair.
Still to come on CGTN, they're one of the world's most famous conservation stories. So what can pandas teach us about protecting other animals and plants from extinction?
Each day, there are millions of stories. Each one can open new perspectives, new possibilities. Wherever you look, we are there to see, discover, explore. We put the pieces together to find what really matters to you, all around the world, all around the clock. Our reporters are at home across the globe. From our headquarters in Beijing and production centers in Washington, Nairobi, and London, China Global Television Network. Stories from across the globe, reaching people across the globe. CGTN. See the difference.
Mari, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome back. In just a week's time, China will bring together world leaders and experts to discuss how to save animals and plants from extinction.
Ahead of the UN Biodiversity Conference, Nicole Ng takes a closer look at the country's arguably most famous conservation story.
Pandas are almost synonymous with China itself. The country's breeding centres renowned for helping the species from the brink of extinction. But what's less known is a separate program helping wild pandas.
Well, here in the southwest of China, work has been underway for decades to protect habitat and monitor pandas in the wild. They're still quite rare, so it's unlikely we're going to see any today. But workers are going to take us into the forest to learn more.
Wulong is where it all began. In the 60s, it became the first reserve in China dedicated to the conservation of wild pandas. Rangers help track and monitor the animals.
Many animals will pass through this corridor, so this could be any of them. But the likelihood of it being a panda is quite high. There are many here. The marks they leave can have many meanings, like marking territory.
They know the different types of bamboo the pandas like to eat, and they'll set up infrared cameras nearby to record their movements.
He will probably be over there eating bamboo, then come over here to the path. It's quite an open area, so he'll probably pass through here.
In the 10 years he's been a ranger, Xiaolong has only seen a wild panda in person once. That's how elusive they are. But the cameras are often able to capture them. The rangers brought me to another area they've been monitoring. The park is home to an estimated 150 pandas, up from just 100 20 years ago. Every decade, a countrywide count is conducted, the current one still underway. But researchers are unsure if the increase reflects an actual population rise or if they've just gotten better at identifying individual pandas.
The earliest surveys would involve analyzing the bamboo and the panda feces we found. Now we can use things like DNA technology, which makes the counting more accurate.
Wulong is part of a new giant panda national park, linking various fragments of habitat across several provinces. I asked Tang Zhuo how this might help with conservation efforts.
Increased human activity has an impact on these protected areas, so the Chinese government is trying to fix this by connecting various protected zones. This could help with gene exchange and help protect the species even further.
And though giant pandas are no longer endangered, efforts are ongoing to help them thrive and to serve as a lesson in conservation for the future. Nicole Ng, CGTN.
The conservation group is trying to bring back the endangered Tasmanian Devil to the Australian mainland. There are only around 20,000 of the marsupials left in the wild. The group hopes the project can help protect other endangered species as well. Our correspondent Greg Navarro explains.
A year has passed since conservation group Aussie Ark released more than 24 Tasmanian devils into a remote fenced-in reserve in New South Wales.
We've had zero mortality, so every devil released survived. That's a really significant thing in itself. We had initially offered and subsidised food for their settling in and acclimatisation. We've really radically decreased that.
Okay. Scientists believe dingoes led to the devil's disappearance from Australia's mainland about 3,000 years ago. 12 months later, these devils are not only surviving here, they're thriving and multiplying.
We observed mating, and then in June, we were able to trap, which is the only way that we can see the devils, and inspect to see if we had capture. We indeed do.
She'd only be about 10 months old.
Australia has lost more mammals to extinction than any other country on the planet. The country's 2019-2020 unprecedented bushfires and other threats to habitats have further endangered the future of several species. They've also added a sense of urgency to conservation efforts.
We're being faced increasingly with these challenges in wildlife conservation that we haven't had to face before, or things are happening much faster, and we've just got to become comfortable with trying things we haven't done before.
One of the biggest challenges with trying to bring back a species to an area once inhabited in this country is figuring out a way to minimize the risks posed by Australia's most notorious introduced pests: feral cats and foxes. It's believed foxes were responsible for a disappointing end to a similar program in 2018 to reintroduce 19 eastern quolls to the mainland.
The foxes still got them. Even with radically upscaled baiting and control programs, they still got them one by one.
Oh, mate. The program involving Tasmanian devils is different. Firstly, they're protected by a fence designed to keep predators out. That's allowing devils to become established before moving to the next phase. But the real difference here is the devils themselves, a meat-eating marsupial known to control and disrupt populations of foxes and feral cats, which are responsible for about 90% of Australia's mammal extinctions.
The reality is, by having an apex species like that, you're protecting so much more, right down to the flora. The smaller invertebrates and amphibians and reptiles and tiny little mammals and birds.
The type of vulnerable native species that conservationists say really need all the help they can get to survive. Greg Navarro, CGTN, Sydney.
Russia is about to make space history, sending the first commercial film crew to the International Space Station. On Tuesday, an actor and director will take off for a 12-day journey, during which they will film scenes for an upcoming movie. Julia Chapman reports from Moscow.
Space exploration has long been a favourite subject for filmmakers, but never has a movie actually been filmed in outer space. Russia is about to change that. The film is called The Challenge. It centres around a doctor sent to space to treat a cosmonaut. Actress Julia Peresild had to meet strict criteria to win the role and go through rigorous training.
It was difficult, psychologically difficult, physically difficult, emotionally difficult. I think we're waiting for the moment when we achieve our goal. Then everything won't seem so difficult. Everything will be fine, we'll be smiling. But if I'd known how difficult it would be when I agreed to do this, I would still have agreed.
Although the actress and director are new to the world of spaceflight, they'll be piloted by an experienced cosmonaut. The crew will launch from Kazakhstan's Baikonur Cosmodrome in a Russian Soyuz capsule.
The Soviet and Russian history of space exploration has been marked by milestones. The first satellite in space, the first man, the first woman. Despite challenges to its modern space program, the country has added another achievement, the first film crew in space. And officials weren't going to let the Americans beat them to it.
It was the US that first announced plans for a feature film in space. NASA and SpaceX announced plans to shoot part of a movie on the ISS. Tom Cruise is billed to visit the station. But that project is still in the pipeline, while Russia rockets ahead.
There's a lot of experimentation in this project. We will confront difficulties, some of which we will have anticipated. Others we won't have been able to, even though we've had a lot of space experience shared with us. This is the first time. The second will be easier.
Spaceflight is no longer a privilege reserved only for astronauts. Last month, SpaceX sent the world's first all-civilian crew into orbit. These filmmakers are likely to be the first of many to come. Julia Chapman, CGTN, Moscow.
And another actor about to boldly go where he's never been before. Yes, 90-year-old William Shatner may have lived long and prospered, captaining Star Trek's famous Enterprise, but now he's been picked by Jeff Bezos as a passenger in the next Blue Origin flight, set for takeoff next week. He'll become the oldest person ever to reach the final frontier. In a statement, Shatner said he'd heard about space for a long time and was taking the opportunity to see it for himself.
The headlines again. The US trade representative resists pressure from business to drop tariffs on Chinese imports, but offers some targeted exclusions.
Petrol Patrol. The British Army steps in to help deliver fuel as the country's supply crisis continues.
And the Spanish government pledges $240 million for reconstruction on La Palma, where the volcano continues to wreak havoc.
And some news just coming in while we've been on air. Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp have all been hit by a widespread outage. Users in countries including the UK and the United States have been affected.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks very much for watching.
There's more on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app. And in the UK, 24 hours a day on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, Africa Live. But we'll see you again tomorrow. Same time, same place. From all the team here in London, goodbye, goodbye.